you've not just suddenly become superior at doing something everybody else. You've just done the basics well and over again, and you've trained. And so if you're able to do that, anybody can, And so you're always aware of that when you go to a unit that, if you're training, you do the basics well over and over again. Eventually, you become proficient, you become expert at it, and so that's the same for anything. And I think that gives people heart because they're like, this SAS guy he didn't have a built-in nav system that he knows where all the stars are. He knows where north is at any given time. He magged to grid any time. He's just trained and he's done the basics over and over again until he's become proficient at it. And if I can, you can. And that's the way it works.
If you like this podcast or the previous ones, please consider buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Frankie'sPod. It just goes to help fund the software and the hosting. Right, just before we crack on with this episode, just a quick word about our sponsor, KS Civils and Groundworks Limited, based in Leeds. They have over 296 years of combined experience in civil engineering and groundworks. Led by Director Carl Smith, their team is known for honesty, reliability and commitment to the highest safety and quality standards. They're proudly ISO accredited and fully CHAS Elite accredited. No matter the size of your project, KS Civils and Groundworks delivers professional, trustworthy service you can rely on. To learn more, visit kscivilsandgroundworks.co.uk. Now let's dive back into this episode. Right, welcome back to the podcast. Tonight I've got the honour of talking to Colin MacLachlan. Colin joined the Royal Scots in 1989 and served up until 2006. He's got quite a good story. He's got a book coming out as well called The Pilgrim, which I can't wait to get my hands on. As we've just discussed before this, I probably won't read it, but that's apparent. I'll wait till it comes out on audiobook. Hey, Colin, how are you doing?
Yeah, very well. Thanks for having me on.
No, honestly, like I said to everyone who comes on, I couldn't do this without people volunteering to actually come on and do the podcast with me. I'd look a bit silly sat here on my own trying to do it. It's the same questions I ask everybody who comes on a podcast for you. So it's where did you grow up? Why did you join? What was it like? Why did you leave? And what have you done since? And most of the time for a lot of people, it's the what have you done since is just as interesting as the military service. So if you could just start with give us a background about yourself and where did you grow up? What was it like? And why did you join the military?
Yeah, and I grew up I grew up initially in Livingston, and I moved out to a little tiny village called Woolfords. Only had about a dozen houses or something in it at the time, no other sort of children my age, and that sort of sheltered me a little bit from my upbringing. So I probably thought my upbringing was fairly normal, and it probably wasn't in a lot of senses. And that sort of set the precedent for that sort of resilient stuff, which would help me later on in life.
I mean, growing up, and I grew up in a town called Hartlepool, and it wasn't very nice, really. The town was a bit rough and everything like that, but it was just normal. I didn't grow up on a council estate, but it was just in that area type of thing. So I consider myself to have quite a normal upbringing, especially for people who join the military, because that's the people you want that have not been spoon fed, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I think there's no coincidence that a lot of the infantry, a lot of the people within the SAS have come up from quite difficult backgrounds, which we probably didn't think at the time, but as we've sort of grown up, realised that you had to kind of fend for yourself. You had to be quite strong. You had to have that sort of inner steel and resilience, and that's quite a common thing throughout. I think for me, it was, there was a lot going on with my parents and stuff, and NSPCC and children's panels and social workers were all sort of part of my world growing up at that age. But that was to set the scene for later on, when I think you need that ability to suffer, when you're doing any difficult course in the military. Anybody will tell you, whether it's P Company or you're doing stuff for the Marines or selection, you have to have that ability to just suffer. And I think we're gradually losing the ability to do that. I might get quite cynical at my old age, but I think we're losing that ability just to suffer a little bit. And as soon as things start, not going our way, we tend to give up, or affects our mental health in ways in which we can provide little force fields that protect against that in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that society has changed a hell of a lot since our time. I mean, I joined in 1985, and I've never had it really rough in the military. Throughout, I did 27 years and got out as a full screen. So yeah, bit of a flyer. But I think what I've noticed now with young people, I mean, I work with a couple of young kids. I say young kids, they're 22, 23. Is I couldn't imagine them joining the military, and that's not a bad thing. Not everyone's cut out for that, but I really don't think that the youth of today sound like an old man. I am. They could could hack it. People, like you said, then tend to give up, or they put up a front, or the blame. They tend to blame a lot of things on other things when ideally it's just get on with it.
Yeah, and I think anybody who's been successful in any organisation, sport, field, they've had to go through that period of suffering. And I think when I joined as a 15-year-old, and I think back, a lot, and you think about 15-year-olds now joining up in the army, but if you go back, a generation two before us, people were on the front line at 15. People signed up to go to war at 15. So they would probably look at my generation and be like, well, you had it easy, and in many ways we did, and it was nothing like the world wars. But now I look at 15-year-olds and I think, would they be able to join up and go away and do stuff? I'm not sure for the vast majority, but I guess that's the way the world's going.
I mean, there's the old thing in it. Is like everyone's, when I was in training, it was harder. It was when people before me, oh, we had it harder than you and stuff like that. I mean, I've interviewed guys who joined in like 1960, and what they discussed about their basic training and their year in junior leaders and stuff like that is not dissimilar to what we went through in our time. But then I've spoken to guys who've joined a lot recently, and I spoke to one of the guy who was a commanding officer at Pairbright, and training is very, very different now. But I think that's just a societal change. We haven't got enough people joining the military. I don't know what the answer is to bring people in to do that. More advertising and whatever, but you need to. We haven't got a big enough army to get that many in, but we're still on demand. But it's just a different world now.
Yeah, and I think we've tried to shrink our regular army and expand our reserves like the American model, and it hasn't really worked the same for a number of different complex reasons. And I don't know if I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard this rumor that at the depot now, recruits, I think they've done away with this, but apparently the story was that if a recruit felt like an instructor was shouting at him too loud or telling him to do press ups or something he didn't want to do it, he could give him a yellow card, and the instructor had to leave. And I thought, I think back to my day, and I think that's just unbelievable. People pulling out yellow and red cards. I just imagine that the battlefield.
It's actually it is true. I interviewed a couple of people who were instructors at Pairbright in Harrogate, and they confirmed it. And I found it a bit of a shock. And I mean, I did that years ago. I left the army in 2012, and it started that then. What they've got now is even worse. So they can get given iPads, and they have to, they give you a fucking review. And that's just ridiculous. They're not supposed to swear at recruits and stuff like that. I mean, how can you build someone up? Like, you're supposed to knock them down and build them back up, ready to go to war. The model that they're using now, it must be working because we've still got an army.
Yeah.
Just. So what made you actually want to join then?
Yeah, well, I never set out to join the army. I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I grew up, and I think my choices at the time were you need to be a doctor, a dentist, or a lawyer. You know, those were the choices that were thrown at me, and I didn't fancy any of those, and I didn't even stay in school long enough to sit my exams, and I got taken down to the careers office. And there was at those times you sat this test, and then they told you what you could apply for. And I did okay in the test, and the guy in the careers office said you can apply for whatever you want. You know, you've scored quite highly in this test. And I remember looking round, and there was a guy hanging off a radar dish in Hong Kong with like these blue short sleeve shirt on. I thought that looks good. And I still remember the title now. It was a telecommunications systems analyst operator. And you know, that's me remembering as a 15-year-old kid. That's how important I thought that title was. And I said, I want to be that guy. And the guy said, well, it's a year's waiting list and then 2 years training. And my mum said, nah, he's got to be out the house by the time he's 16. So I joined up the infantry 2 weeks later.
You know, the amount of people I've spoke to who got their careers office and went, "Right, I want to do that." Well, you're gonna have to wait a bit longer. Oh no, I'm not waiting. Exactly the same thing happened to me. I wanted to join the Air Corps, and for some reason in the mid-80s, everybody wanted to join the Air Corps, and it was like May time, and they said no, you'd have to wait till October, and I was like, I'm not hanging around, and I need to do something. So I ended up in the artillery. I didn't even know what the artillery was, to be honest. But I don't regret it. Don't regret it at all. So, what made you pick the Royal Scots, or was that thrown on you?
I think they chose that for me. I think they said you're going to join the Royal Scots, and it may well be because I was at the Bathgate Careers Office, and that was, you know, the Royal Scots sort of
Hmm.
centre of the stomping ground. So I joined the Royal Scots without knowing too much about it, although my granddad had served in the Royal Scots, so I knew of them. And so yeah, it sounded good. So off I went.
So, I mean, you've got no other like military background in the family or immediate family before you joined. So you went. Were you ready to go away?
No, I definitely wasn't ready. I was a pretty shy, skinny little 15-year-old kid, and I went down and did junior leaders down at GIB Euston down by Newcastle.
Oh, I know that camp.
And I had to grow up pretty quick, and I was in there with 17, 18-year-old boys, you know, and the difference between a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old is quite a lot at
Yeah.
that age. So yeah, I got to grow up quick, learn quick, learned how to suffer, and in many ways I already had that. I had a bit of discipline, had all these chores that I had to do in the house by a certain time, or there was corporal punishment for that. I was used to that. I was used to being able to suffer, you know, and so that I had the building blocks, and
Hmm.
I just kind of took it from there.
So, what was it like first turning up? Was it called Albemarle Barracks then, or did it have a different name?
No, I think it was Albemarle Barracks,
Yeah,
and I don't know what it is now, but
it's artillery. I
oh,
spent
is it?
6 years there. It's a
Ah,
shithole.
well,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I know Albemarle very well. Ugh, I've got shivers now already. Middle of
yeah.
nowhere. It
And I
snowed it in
remember,
the
I
winter.
remember the BFT being really difficult because you had to run around the airfield in the wind, which was always nice.
Yeah.
But uh, but yeah, that was it. That was the start of it, and I thought, you know, I probably wasn't soldier material when I first joined, but I think as that year progressed, by the end of that year, I thought, right, I'll make a go of it.
I mean, you touched on there that you were quite used to being reprimanded, let's say, for not doing your chores or whatever, like you said, like you mentioned. How did you find the discipline when you joined? Then did you? I mean, I don't know what um, the junior infantry battalion was like. I mean, for myself, I went to junior leaders Royal Artillery, and I wouldn't say it was rough. I mean, it was a shock to my system because I didn't know what to expect from it. But the discipline side, looking back, for us wasn't that bad. But I think we had a really good couple of troop sergeants that didn't go over the top, if you know what I mean. I'd heard stories about other places that did. But I think in our trip we were quite lucky. Did you experience any of that, or
Yeah, I think
anything
that
you
was
don't know?
quite normal back then. I think back in the 80s, it was normal for instructors, if you stepped out of line, they'd give you a clip. Like, things have obviously changed that way. But like I say, that wasn't something that was a shock to the system. I kind of expected it if I stepped out of line, and like I say, the discipline side was stuff that was fine. I wasn't great at drill. Never was. Never really liked drill. I was always a soldier. I like being dirty out in the field playing soldiers. I was never a. People say, "What's the worst environment you've been in?" I always say the barracks. The barracks was like the worst for me. Yeah.
I mean, it's funny, innit? You say that, and it's like you get guys who are always in trouble when they're in camp, or they're fucking always late, or this, that, and the other. But then they hate it. But you stick him out in the field or on tour or anything like that, and they excel. But unfortunately, a lot of your reports written on what you do in camp because that's where you spend the majority of your time. So for certain people, it doesn't go too well. I'm not saying that was me, but might have been. So I mean, did you find the fitness and everything okay while you were there?
No, I think when I first joined, I wasn't particularly fit. I didn't have a lot of muscle mass. I wasn't used to, running like you do, and particularly in the infantry, it's a lot about cardio. It's a lot about running. Not so much about running with weight at that stage. It was things like BFTs, APFAs, bleep tests. So you would find all the little skinny, racers, the racing snakes. Those were the ones, but I slowly built that up over time. But no, when I first joined, I wasn't particularly great at anything fitness. Being a soldier, I just sort of developed it over that year, and then took that with me into the unit, and then it sort of blossomed from there, probably.
I mean, did you find? Do you think? Not do you find? Do you think that we were wrong in getting rid of all the junior leader establishments and amalgamating them into one at Harrogate? Because personally, I think I know we haven't got a big enough army to do that anymore. But I think it was better. The previous model was better because you end up with, like, I wouldn't say specialisation, but for one of a different word you do. So the junior signals, the junior infantry battalions, the junior leaders regiment, Royal Artillery, and stuff like that. You came up with your trade courses and you were going to be the future leaders. You had a bit more over the guys who went through just normal basic training and then phase two and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think it would give a lot of 15, 16-year-olds out there who are limited in options and might go into something they don't enjoy. I think it would give them something. And even if you didn't stay in the military, you could have a few years there where it would set you up for success in whatever you did. So no, I'm a big fan of it. And people say, oh, about people joining up. It's not for everybody, but I think there's loads of 15, 16-year-olds out there that would benefit from junior leaders.
I mean, they've got AFC Harrogate. Again, I'd prefer it the old way. Again, Harrogate's it's a college type of thing, and obviously they do the basic training and everything, all of that, and they go and do the phase two. But in my opinion, it's just been better before. So I mean, you've gone through junior leaders, you've built yourself up, you've progressed over the year. What was it like turning up at your first battalion at the Royal Scots? I mean, because a lot of people find that just as daunting as joining the military.
Yeah, and it was slightly different for me because at that time my unit was in Germany. So I think you had to be 17 and a half to go to Germany. And not only that, you had to, they were doing their Op Granby training for the first Gulf. So
Mm.
I got sent to the RHF down in Oakington Barracks at Cambridge. And there's a famous story from the RHF at that time. They were down at Oakington Barracks, and a couple of their guys were like jumped off a couple of the gypsy community down there. So the whole battalion mustered up and just cleared the gypsy site, like just trashed all the caravans, battered all the gypsies, moved them out of Cambridge. And this was my first week, like with being with the RHF, and I was like, "Oh my God, is this what the army's like?" Like this, I remember doing the bayonet training, but I didn't know I'd be going to doing like civ pop clear out of entire, cities and stuff. So that was that was a sharp learning there. And then I moved to Germany once I'd done my Granby training for the first Gulf. I moved out to Germany, and I always joke the first two guys that I saw who are quite synonymous in the Royal Scots was these two guys, John Lothian and John Gaylor. And I was in the back of a 4-tonner, and I'm sitting there with all the other like guys all joining my age, skinny little 17 and a half, 18-year-olds in the back of this 4-tonner. And I could see their heads over the top of the 4-tonner before we put the tailgate down. I was like, oh my God, like they are giants. And they just happen to be like two of the biggest guys in the Royal Scots. But in my head, this skinny little, 17-year-old with like, wee skinny arms and everything. I was thinking, what do they feed these guys? Like they're monsters. But no, Germany was a great place for a young soldier. You had beer festivals and everything else. So yeah, I enjoyed it. That was it was a great first posting for me.
I mean, the one thing I found, again, Germany was my first posting as well. When I got to the regiment, everyone obviously they're all older, because I mean, I was about 17 and a half when I got to Germany. But they all just seemed ancient. I mean, you still had like 22-year, gunners, privates, and they were ancient. I mean, they were only 40 odd. Christ, I'm 56 now. It's very different, but everyone just seemed so much older, and you had to earn the respect. It wasn't given, and that's where you found if you were a bit of a dick or not, to be honest. And you look forward to the next lot of recruits coming in, so that you weren't getting all the shit all the time. And I wouldn't say there was a lot of bullying going around. I was quite lucky in my regiment that we didn't really experience too much of that, but other regiments I know did. How was that like in the Royal Scots?
Yeah, I didn't really experience that. I think there was individuals that were bullies. I think there was probably individuals that were bullied, but in the whole, I was quite fortunate. I had an experience not long after I joined. It was only a month or two after I joined, and one of the Lance Jacks, Lance Corporals, put me on like a staff parade where I had to go down at 10 o'clock with my bed space and everything all laid out. And I went down there, and I think he'd had a word with the provost sergeant, and I got told I had to come back at 11, then told I had to go back at 12. And it was just, that was the first thing I just thought it was a game, this is the new guy. Let's just, put him under the cosh for a bit, see how he reacts. So I just tried to, do my best back down there at 12. Anyway, the rest of my platoon obviously disliked this Lance Corporal. I think he had a bit of a habit for that, pick on the new guy or whatever. And they all just battered him. And then, so I'm ready at 12 o'clock, and the rest of my platoon came down and went, nah, you're all right, wee man. Just get your stuff and come back up. And I was like, all right. And I go back up, and, there's a Lance Corporal in his room just like that, and I'm like, all right, okay. So, yeah, I mean, that's what life was like back then, wasn't it? There was,
Yeah. Bloody hell, you've just reminded me of something. I spent, I think it was about 24 days on restriction of privileges without getting charged. And they kept wondering why I was getting drunk in the night. Because the last parade was like 11 o'clock. So I'd take all my stuff back to the block and jump the fence, go downtown, and get back right in time for morning to go down like for 6:30 in the morning. Like swaying and that. I mean, that was without being charged. That was just, you're being a dick. Sort yourself out. RO pays for you. You wouldn't get away with that now. With that guy, that guy system and that.
They'd get a yellow card, right?
Yeah, yeah. A fucking red one. I I'd forgot all about that. Jesus. Yeah, I had a bit of a reputation, to say the least. I was a bit of a naughty boy, but we all grew out of it in the end. So, what was the first tours that you did? Like getting ready for what's going to happen later on in your career.
Yeah, so after that was things like Tours of Ireland. The Royal Scots were running out of Ireland, South Armagh, quite a lot. So I think we did tours in like, I want to say 92, 93, 94, 96. Did they do a tour in '98? They were in and out of South Armagh all the time, and I don't know whether that's because I think they like to use the Scottish infantry battalions. They were a bit less, a bit softer on Civ Pop rather than sending the paras or something. I don't know, or an English regiment, but we would do quite a few tours of South Armagh back in the days where the '90s weren't that bad in Northern Ireland, but things like the sniper were South Armagh sniper was on the go, and sadly we lost Lawrence Dixon. Was a great guy, and that was in um, my multiple when we were in Fort Kill. So I was quite young then when that happened. I probably only would be would I be 18 by then? 19, maybe 19. And so yeah, so South Armagh's another place that you go to Northern Ireland again, you grow up quick and it's operational experience.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, around that time there wasn't a lot going on in the world. My first tour was a maze tour in Northern Ireland, and that was just shit, to be honest. It was just boring, staggering in towers and stuff like that. Didn't really get to go out and do that many patrols just around around the outskirts of the prison and stuff like that. Going over to do a couple of weeks over at Crumlin Road, that was quite interesting. Watching a very different, you've got easier access to seeing the people who are in there as opposed to the maze where we used to get told off for shining the torches at the windows. Little did we know it used to set the alarms off, so that's weird. But getting ready for a Northern Ireland tour as a young sprog, you're right. It kind of makes a man of you. Or is that the right way to say it? Yeah, because you don't know what's going to happen when you go out there. You've got to get on with it and grow up quick.
Aye, and I think for particularly a young soldier and it's one of your first tours, I think you get that sense of vulnerability. You go through training, you're part of something, and you think, and then next minute you're walking the streets and you're got a big load on your back, and you feel like a target. You feel quite vulnerable, and especially when you're hearing about incidents going off, the snipers at work, that's the first time you probably feel vulnerable as a soldier, that you're not, you can be the best shot in the world, you can have the best guys around you, a sniper, you're so that's probably the first time that you really had to think about fieldcraft and tactics and soldiering and actions on and stuff like that. But it was a great stomping ground for a young soldier to learn their trade before taking it elsewhere.
I think one of the, you just mentioned some of that reminded me. When the last tour I did of Ireland was like 97. We lost one of our guys, Stephen Restrick, to a sniper. And weirdly, it was up until that happened, it was kind of, because it had been a fairly quiet tour, and you were just like, what am I doing here? What's the point? Type of thing. Whether we were there rightly or wrongly is not for me to decide. I think we were there rightly. There was various other conflicts that we probably shouldn't have been in. But when that happened, you were like, fucking hell. Really? This is real. Because nothing had happened up until then. You were like, what's the fucking point of this? And you become a bit jaded by everything that's happening and stuff like that, and get bored, and then something like that, and then you realise, actually, this is fucking serious.
Yeah, and I remember Stephen Restrick, and it's a name that you don't forget, because anybody that was in and out of Northern Ireland at the time, that was big news. And I can't remember whether Stephen Restrick was just before Lawrence Dixon or just after it, but it was around about the same time. But whereas, and actually, it's interesting because you think about the Iraq conflict in Afghanistan, and you might remember the first soldier, but there was so many casualties that you can't possibly remember every name. Whereas Northern Ireland names stood out because that was big news. It was big news in the UK at home on the news, and all the battalions knew about it. Everybody kind of who was in and out of Ireland at that time remembers Stephen Restrick.
Yeah, Stephen was the last guy killed on Banner. Not a thing that I'd like to fucking have myself. The day that happened, it just everybody woke up. Not that they were asleep before that, but it's just, it's very, I wouldn't say hard, but something good that came from it was his mother. The way she handled it and everything like that, and helped towards, some of the peace process and stuff. And she didn't hold anyone to account. She didn't hate anyone for it and stuff like that. I don't think I could have been as resilient as her, let's say. But for that process to go through, I suppose different people handle it in different ways and everything like that. So what was it for you after the island tours?
Yes, we did island tours, and of course, as well as that, you did other things. You did tours of places like Cyprus or Belize, Kenya, Kathandini Jungle out there, America, Seattle, the Ranges, and then sort of promotional courses, so sort of juniors, junior Brecken and Recce commanders, and there was a lot of people senior to me. And although I was younger, but don't forget that I'd done junior leaders, and the majority
Yeah.
of them hadn't. So even though I was 19, 20, ready for my Lance Corporal course, these guys had only joined a year or two ago. They were probably getting in front of me, even though I had just as much experience. So I felt like I was hitting this ceiling where I couldn't get onto the promotional courses, and these people were either going on or failing or whatever. So I moved. I moved from a rifle company to the signals, and everybody was like, "Why are you going to signals?" The signals kind of within an infantry battalion is known as all the, the fat guys, the non-soldiers, the guys that just go there to do the bleeps, and the radios. But I loved the signals, and they gave me more opportunities there than I had in any of the rifle companies. They were quite happy to send me on all the courses. So I kind of went sideways to the signals to get on all these courses to be able to go back. So yeah.
I mean, I worked in battle group headquarters quite a bit, and mingled with the guys who'd done the signals for the infantry, mainly the RRF and stuff like that. Or the RRF. And I'll tell you what, I thought, well, without sounding derogatory, as another arm, you kind of look down on the infantry. You think, oh, fucking grunts and stuff like that. And I know it isn't like that, but you tend to do, it's banter and stuff like that. But when I got involved with the guys at battle group headquarters who were the signallers, I was just like, fucking hell, they fucking know more than us, and they're better than us. We specialise in fire orders and stuff like that, but we couldn't fix as much kit as they could. I was watching some of the signal sergeants rip radios apart, and I was like, I'm not allowed to do that. Why is that? But I had a lot of respect for them.
And I think it's something that you can agree. Not everybody, but I think a lot of people gradually get a respect for other units as they gain experience, because everybody's battalion will tell you you're the best battalion and everybody else is nonsense. And as you grow up, you meet guys from other battalions, guys that are just as good as soldiers, just as nice guys, just better at their job than you are at yours. And I think so. I've never really been one of those that have slated other battalions. Like, this is another battalion, they're just, they're this, or he's in this battalion, so he must do that. I just think that the armed forces are so fast that you've got good and bad apples in every unit, and just because you're from one unit doesn't mean that you can't go in selection, or you're not fit, or you're any less of a soldier than anybody else. And I gathered that through my experience of doing courses and meeting other guys in different units.
I mean, the thing is, it's about the arms as well. So if you're in the artillery, you don't really appreciate what the Royal Engineers do or the Royal Signals do, because you don't know what their scope is or their jobs. And it's when you get to a level where you're intermingling with them all that you see a bigger picture. And it's very interesting. When I got to battle group headquarters, we were in the fire planning cell, and I didn't understand or didn't know what everybody did and stuff like this. But it was just like, yeah, you can see the big picture coming together, and that's just at battle group level. I mean, further up, Jesus,
I always thought that with the signals. I never managed to work as central as that, but I always think when you work at a sort of battle group level, you see all the moving parts and the kind of stages of warfare, which you don't get a picture from. Certainly in an infantry battalion, from, being a corporal or a sergeant. You kind of see it from a smaller, cog in the wheel. But I think when you work at that battle group level, you get to see how it all gets put together. So it's a great stint for anybody to do it there, to see the kind of top down.
So what made you go for selection then?
I think how it all started. I didn't really know much about the SAS, and I think the first thing that I ever heard about was Pathfinders. And they were like, oh, these guys, they skydive in early, they secure, DZs and airfields and stuff. And I thought, that sounds quite interesting. I'll probably go for Pathfinders. I didn't know anything about it, didn't know anything about the selection. And then when we were, I think one of our last tours in Northern Ireland, I did a job called the Close Observation Platoon. So, you kind of kid on at being sneaky beaky, hide in bushes and video things and think you're James Bond, and you're not really. But the close observation platoon course is quite hard. You're doing the beat runs and the log runs, and you're getting a little bit of surveillance and stuff like that, and OPs. So it's an interesting course. I really enjoyed it. And there's an SAS instructor on it who's like, a Jedi. And then when I was in Northern Ireland, we're in the COP, nobody knows we're here, we're camouflaged, we're doing some video, and then just out of nowhere, these two guys with beards and like just totally like shoddy kit just crawled in and went, right lads, we'll take it from here. And we're like, what? And they were, these were like Hereford guys that had just like come straight in the middle of the bush, kicked us out, and and then I thought, wow, these are, these are the real Jedis. I'm just like kidding on. So I thought I'll put my papers in. But I was from a unit from the Royal Scots, so we didn't have a lot of soldiers in the SAS. I think the last one had been about 20 years prior or something. So
wow.
I didn't really know much about what selection entails. But I put my papers in for it, because I was keen. I was a fit enough soldier. I was okay. So I put my papers in for it and thought I'll give it a go.
So what was it like? I mean, obviously you've got to do the beat up and stuff like that and get ready for it. And you say you didn't really look into it that much or understand what was happening. Were you ready for it when you got there for selection?
No, I don't think I was ready, because I didn't know what selection was. I knew there was a bit where you were running about in hills with packs, so I was very fortunate. My OC at the time, and I got moved before it. And what happened was, when I put my papers in for selection the first time, my papers got put in the bin in the adjutant's office. And I was very fortunate that I was very friendly with somebody that worked in the Adjutant General Corps at the time. And they took my paperwork out the bin and put it on the CO's desk. And he signed it off. So away I went. And everybody always says to me, what's the hardest part of selection? And I think generally, if there's a general part, for me, it's the jungle, because the jungle, it doesn't matter about fitness. You've done the fitness part. It's hard, but you're under micro scrutiny, and it's micro navigation. Your actual infanteering, your soldiering has got to be so on point. Your map reading, your pacing, your rifle work, your drills. Everything's got to be like spot on. And but I always thought the first week was such a rude awakening, because I was used to being, one of the fittest in the Royal Scots. There was people fitter than me. In fact, I was on selection with somebody fitter than me, Chris Busby, and he ended up in the PT Corps. He could run 5-minute miles like me, but he could run better than me. He was just heart and lungs. And he was like a triathlete for Great Britain. He was a great athlete, but good for me to train with. And so I'd been used to being quite fit, and but I was, I went from being a big fish in a little pond to just being another number on selection. So that was probably the biggest shock. I was used to pushing the pace and like stuff like that. Nah, I was middle of the pack. I always tell people, you're always your own measure. It doesn't matter whether you're at the front or the back. You're the measure. You're on your best day. That's the only measure there is. And that's what it was for me in selection. I had to get used to knowing that there was people far better than me. And you also need a little bit of luck in these things, staying injury free, not rolling an ankle, stuff like that. So I was lucky, I stayed relatively injury free. managed to get through it without being anything special. I was middle of the pack. It just so happened that when that 6% at the end had passed, I was still there, but I was still middle of the pack, you know.
You know, I've listened to a lot of guys who talk about selection and stuff like that, and they've all said the same thing, you know, or they all imply the same thing. They'll look round at the rest of the course and think, well, fucking hell, he's better than me, or I'm better than him, or better than you. And all of a sudden, someone who you think is miles better than you either gets binned through injury or through fault of their own. You know, they fail a test or they don't fit the bill, and they're gone, and you think, fucking hell. I thought they were going to be better than me, and vice versa, the other way around as well.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why you remember in the first series of the show and I of the Channel 4 SAS Who Dares Win show, and we thought it would be good to have a mole in there and also to have somebody that seemed like they were strong, capable of anything, and then would suddenly get broken. Because psychologically that can do stuff with us. If we look up to someone and they fail, they fall, they don't succeed in something, suddenly that reflects on us and we think, well, if they can't do it, what chance have we got? Or, conversely, you might think, right, well, I thought they were good and maybe, I've got something about me because I'm still here. So a lot of it's kind of that reflection piece, but we always remember it's just us. We're the measure, everybody's just ordinary people, and you just do your best, and that's the only measure there is.
What was it like actually passing selection then?
Yeah, I always, in my head, it was like, well, it was massive because you've been through something that's 6 months long. It's the hardest thing, and still is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And you've come out the other side, and you're the 6% remaining, and you're on this massive high. And if anything, that's been one of those times that's taught me never to get too excited, never to get too sad, because you're always somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. So this, head of training wing comes in. He goes, right, guys, well done, that's you's finished. MacLachlan, D Squadron, chucks me a berry and then walks out the room. And I'm like, what? And then I report to D Squadron and they're like, are you the new guy? Are you right? Grab that broom and sweep the hanger out. And I'm like, what? I've literally just passed selection. Like I've just done, and now here I am sweeping the hanger out, and it's a great, it's a great humbling, because you're just, yeah, you've passed selection, mate, but you've not even learned any skills yet. You're the lowest. You're the lowest common denominator, and there's something I quite like about that. Almost to the fact where I then became the guy that when officers would come on there either pre-training for selection or they would do officers week, I would be the guy they would roll out. They'd have all the like higher ranks and stuff, but even as a trooper and as a lance jack, they would roll me out in front of the officers. And you'd have these guys, there'd be like majors or colonels, and they'd be on selection. They'd be like, well, isn't this a step down for me? Because I'm looking after just a troop of guys, like a dozen guys or whatever. Like, I'm used to looking after battalions, so I'm sure I'll manage. And I'd be like, oh, you'd manage, right? Cool. I said, what skills do you bring? And they'd be like, well, I'm a leader. And I'd be like, no, we're all leaders. Like, what skills? Oh, I'm a good map reader and blah, blah. I'm like, mate, we're all map reading, with micro navigation in the jungle, pacing, bearings, like, nah, what skills? And they'd be like, well, what do you mean? I'd be like, well, can you drive a tank? I'd be like, no. I said, can you fly a plane? And they'd be like, no. I said, linguist, speak any languages? They'd be like, no. And I'd be like, demolitions? Are you a medic? Are you a forward air controller? Can you fire stingers? And they'd be like, no. And I'd be like, well, actually, mate, you're the lowest common denominator in a team. And that was a great humbling for them because then they're like, all right, this is the Champions League. Now this is everybody in the team's a commander. Everybody, you're full of alphas. You're full of guys that have got the best of training. They might be great engineers. You might have guys that are experienced in artillery. You might have infanteers, but you've got the best of all of those in a team.
Do you think there was any? I mean, you say like they told you to sweep the hanging. Obviously, that they've done that on purpose to just calm you down, type of thing. But is there any, how can I put it, animosity between the squadrons? You know what I mean? Do any of them actually think they're better than the other? And they're all very. Every person I've ever met was in the SAS was quite humble. In all honesty, very professional. The first guy I ever met was in the very early 90s, and we had a Spanish exchange where a couple of our guys, well, a troop of our guys went over to Spain, and they sent guys over to us, and they brought in a interpreter, which was an SAS guy, and he only had one arm, and that amazed us all. But he spoke fluent, and he was a brilliant guy. I can't even remember his name, unfortunately, because it was that long ago. But it was that set a precedent, in my view, of what it's like to be professional. You know, they might not like the Green Army anymore, and they do look down on the Green Army, and I fucking don't blame them either. But is there any? All right, animosity is the wrong word. The rivalry between all the squadrons.
Yeah, and I think people forget that you're not just suddenly a Jedi and then you have your calling and off you go to the SES. The SES is formed by the sort of best guys in from everywhere. So these guys were the Green Army. I was
Yeah,
the Green Army, and then I passed a course, and then I was in the SES. I swapped my headdress. I wasn't any different. I was just there was something there that they thought we can train that. They have the basics. They're fit. They can map read. They're a decent soldier. They've got the right temperament. Okay, and then the door opens, but you're only in the door, and then it's okay. Right now, let's zone in on. Are you a sniper, demolition, metal? That's when your sort of real training begins. So everybody that's walked through those doors at Hereford was Green Army at one stage, and they've just passed a course, and then you've put that sort of sandy berry on. So that never was lost on me. And even though we had great soldiers in the Royal Scots that just never got through selection, didn't make them any worse soldiers. I wasn't any better soldier than them. I just got through selection. Maybe there was something there with resilience, but these guys were fitter than me. There's loads of guys in the Royal Scots that were fitter than me. There was loads of guys that were better in certain areas. I just got through selection. So I don't think anybody ever forgets that. And anybody that's been on selection remembers there was somebody that was far fitter than them, that was far stronger on selection, better in different areas. You always remember you had a bad day, a day where you were slow on a checkpoint, or you didn't quite get a drill quite right, and those always play on your mind selection because they become bigger than they are, and that's a
yeah,
real life thing. We do that in life. We make our problems bigger than they are. We might self-criticize ourselves too much, or we might blow a thing out of proportion. So there was never I never really thought that about different squadrons. I was going to say that there was no squadrons thought they were any better than any others. However, I do think our squadron at one point started to believe that a little bit. There was a point where D Squadron, and they were called D Company because of how they used to operate. Um, I don't think I don't think the individuals like myself thought our squadron was any better than anybody else, because our squadron was the same as everybody else. We passed the same selection. We just so happened to be in the right space at the right time to go on some of the big operations, the big highlight missions, even when we weren't supposed to, even when it was somebody else's turn, but we happened to be closer, so we went and did it. So D Squadron was very lucky. I was very lucky at that time that some of the biggest missions over that decade fell to D Squadron, and I happened to be in D Squadron at that time. So I think particularly the head shed at D Squadron started to believe that D Squadron was D Squadron because they'd done these ops and all the rest of it. And the individuals within the head shed probably thought they were, but I never believed that. I knew there was great, like I've said before about the General Army. There was great soldiers in all the squadrons. All the squadrons had their big hitters and stuff. So it just so happened that that came along. I don't think there was a rivalry between the squadrons. And when I joined, there wasn't really a rivalry between the SAS and the SBS. And one of the great things that happened during the time that I was there was operations where the SAS and the SBS worked together. And whenever that happened, it was a great success. It was win-win. And then what happened was things like Iraq, where they separated them, and then they had a bit of misfortune, SBS, and then that I felt like that set us back about 20 years, because then it created this environment where certain individuals within the SAS were like, "Oh, we won't work with you again. You're not as good as us. You're not, whatever." But I did selection with some of those guys, and they went off to the SBS. They were good guys, and so I never personally felt that way, but I feel like the relationship took a bit of a dent at that time. And you hear all the banter between not just SAS and SBS, but SAS and Delta and who's better and all the rest of it, and it's the same. There's good soldiers in both, and I'm probably biased in that I always think that the actual soldiers, the individuals within the SAS, are better than any other unit in the world. However, there's caveats to that, in that, the Americans had far better equipment than us, far more equipment, far more expensive equipment, far more at their disposal than we had, and so, they far outgunned us in a lot of that. But having been fortunate enough to have worked with most of these different units and everything, I can say, with my hand on my heart, that our individuals, not just within our special forces, but actually within our infantry, our paras and Marines are the best. They would class as special forces in the US. That's the level they're at. They're really good, or certainly were. I've been out of the game a while, but our infantry were very well trained. They were probably one of the best infantries out there, and that lent itself to having a very good special forces.
Question for you then, and I don't know if you'll be able to answer it, obviously not with any specifics or anything like that. But your first operation you went on as part of the SAS, how did you feel about that? Were you ready for that? Were you excited? Was it a bit nervous or?
No, some people, I won't touch on the specifics of it, but many people will know the story of it, and that I was kind of thrown into the deep end. I just happened to be at the right place at the right time, and I got a phone call saying, "This is all kicking off. You're the closest one. Get there." And that was an eye-opener, because I had only been in a little while, and next minute I was the first man on the scene and trying to conduct the whole thing. And for anybody, and we've all been there, we've been chucked right into the deep end. We don't feel like we're ready for it, prepared for it. We expected that other people are going to do it. I'm just going to be a small part in this. And then suddenly we are front and center, and everything's on you. So that was a bit of a rude awakening.
That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, it can be. And actually, the pressure's quite good, and you don't feel it at the time. Well, you do feel it at the time, but afterwards and with reflection, you're happy it was you and you got through it and the way it happened, because I was probably viewed quite differently after that. A lot of people realised that, yeah, he might be the new guy, but yeah, he's a safe pair of hands. And I would always say that in any organisation, and the SS is just one of them, the faster you can get your hands dirty and get thrown into the deep end, the quicker it is for you to be accepted and for people to realise and I joined at a bad time. Not a lot of people know this, although I think I put it in my book that I was probably one of the first and only people to ask to get RTU'd back to my unit, and I wasn't enjoying it, and it's because I joined at a bad time. I joined when I wasn't operational. We were going through a part of the cycle where I wasn't about to deploy, so there I was sweeping hangars and doing other stuff, and and I was based in the UK, and I was there was 6 months where I wasn't going to be doing much, and when things are like that, it can bring out the worst in some people. So some people And it wasn't the really senior people, because they had no complex. It was the guys that were just 6 months senior to you, the guys that had done the selection just before you, because there was this idea of kind of one-upmanship, and so you were the only people that they could, direct their stuff towards. And if they could make you look bad, that would make them look better. And we've seen it in all the units. You always get those guys, and unfortunately we had a couple of those at that time. So in my unit, if you joined, yeah, somebody would take you under the wing and go, listen mate, this is what you need to do, and blah blah blah. If you messed up, obviously, it wasn't going to be good for you, but somebody would try and make sure that at least you knew what you were doing. Whereas when I joined at that time, people almost were looking for you to trip up so they could be the first one to jump on top of you, which isn't healthy.
No.
So this wasn't what I was used to from a professional unit. And even in the Royal Scots, we wouldn't treat people like that. So I asked to get RTU'd. And I went to the Sergeant Major and I was like, that's me, I'm done. I said, I've done 3 months. I'm not enjoying it. I want to go back to the Royal Scots. And he was a bit shocked. He was a great guy. And he was a bit shocked. He was like, what? And I was like, this isn't what I thought. I said, the guys aren't, the atmosphere, what we're doing. I'd be quite happy just going back. And he said, listen, tomorrow we'll put you in front of the OC and I'll give you an OC's interview, and then let's have a chat. So the next day I had this OC's interview, and the OC said, just wait a couple of years, get more of this cycle out the way so that you've got a more rounded picture of what Special Forces life looks like. So I agreed. I didn't want to. If he'd have let me go that day, I would have left and went back to the Royal Scots. Fortunately for me, I stayed. I listened to him, and by the end of that cycle, by the end of a couple of years, it was busy, and so I was. And it was no reflection on myself or whatever. It was how others viewed me. And so by the end of that 2 years, I was well and truly settled. I enjoyed being there. We'd done some really exciting stuff, and I thought it was the last place I was going to leave.
It's weird, you just said there about sweeping a hanger. Us low life, us the green, the Green Army, and that, or me. You don't expect to hear that. You think that, right, you've got the berry, they're in there, they're out, they're just doing this all the time. They're either over there doing that operation or over there doing this, and you forget that there's a mundane life that has to be upheld. There's vehicle maintenance, there's this, that, and the other. There's you forget that. You just don't imagine like the SAS or the SBS doing that.
Yeah, and you forget that just like anybody else, the SAS has to clean the weapons, pick up the brass, do the area cleaning, doing all the stuff that, do guard duties. Do stuff that, you always thought, oh, I've got the berry now, that's me, I'll just be on call ready, abseiling through a window with some milk tray, that's me, and it's not like that, it's and it was a lot of training and a lot of real high level of training in different areas, and you never really stop training. Anybody that's been in the SAS for a while will tell you selection just gets you in the door. Then you start on this training that then takes you off in different directions, whether it's surveillance or demolitions or linguist or whatever. That's when you kind of not specialize, but you start to go off into different areas and do different things. But no, I was sweeping a hangar, I was cleaning vehicles, I was picking up the brass. You'd be doing a guard duty. These things all they happen there as well. You forget. You're just you're still an ordinary human being.
I mean, you just mentioned there about the courses, and the courses that you get offered there or you do there. Like the medic courses, you're fucking almost a paramedic when you finish them type of thing, and you get some of the best instructors in the world. I've listened to guys who've mentioned, they'd have some like an old woman come in and tell them about how they should feel, and I've said that the wrong way around, really. But for surveillance courses and stuff like that, and they'd have people come in, and you're like, "Who the fuck's that?" And they tell them who they are, tell about their story and stuff like that, and then you're just like, right, get it now type of thing. But you just get trained to such a high level that do you find that there's pressure on people when they're on the courses and stuff like that?
I think so, and I think it's always that thing about remembering where you are and what people expect of you. And I always think that I'm the same. I still hold the SAS in as high a regard as I did when I was in the Green Army before. And I was lucky. I was a fan that got to play for my team. That's it. So I read all the books, I read all the McNabb books, and then I went on selection, and then, so I still hold them equally, if not more, in high regard than even though I was part of it.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is that thing that you're always conscious that the regiment's something massive. It's had this big history from our forefathers and all that did the real stuff, did the away for years doing all this stuff. You just get past the ball for a little while. You guard it as best you can. You treat it with respect, and you pass it on to the next person when you leave. That's always how I felt, and it's how I still feel. I had a very small, brief little blip in time for how that SAS legacy has been since it started. And I was conscious of that from things like you talk about the patrol medics course. I remember we did a course, and my very good friend John Hollinsworth, no longer with us, unfortunately, was shot and killed in Iraq. And I was on my medic course with him, and we did our exchange, like one of our attachments at one of the hospitals. And we go in one day, and there's a guy that's fallen off a high rise. He's quite really badly injured, and we go in there, and we're both working on him from different ends. So we're putting in, pneumothoraxes in, we're putting chest drains in from either side, bilateral chest drains, and we've got 2-year med students behind us who aren't allowed to come in, and they're observant. Now we've done a 6-week course, and
Yeah.
we're working on the top of them. The guy's like, if you need to put a crike in, stick it in, and we've got these 2-year med students who, have been at med school for 2 years, and they're not qualified to come in and do it. So that part was never lost on me. We'd go away places, we'd have morphine, and you'd have ambulance technicians that weren't supplied with morphine, they weren't allowed to carry it and stuff. So you got an idea of the standard of sometimes the position that you find yourself in, that privileged position, and you're always conscious of it. You don't want to mess it up because you don't want to mess up for the next guy, or what people, their perception of what the regiment would be. So anytime you went on an external course, I had to be the fittest. I had to be the person. I went on a GPM GSF course. Guys were like, "Oh, we'll take turns carrying." I went, "No, you give me the full SF kit. You give me everything, and I'll just take it myself." And I would run with them, and they'd be like, "This guy's like a monster." I probably wasn't. I was probably hanging out, but I was like, there's a reputation, and I'm going to do
Yeah.
my best to keep it. So that by the time you leave this course, you go back to your unit and be like, "This guy was like a machine," and I wasn't. I was hanging out, but I was going to do everything I could to make sure that perception was still there.
You're right. I mean, and again, touching back on what I said earlier about what the Green Army thinks of the SAS. I remember we were out on exercise in Jordan, and we got for the weekend we got a couple of SAS guys attached to us, and we were teaching us night nav and lying up during the day and stuff like this. And we were just kind of in awe of them, and at one point we were in this big marquee, well, 18 by 24, sorry. And we're all sat inside, and they're giving us some information and lecture and stuff like that. And it says, right, everyone go out for a smoke break. Make sure you have a hot drink, type of thing, because it's the best thing to have in the desert. And I'm like, hot drink? I want a fucking cold drink. Oh. But as we walked out the back of the tent, it's where they'd set their little basher up, and they were living in that, really. Because there was different parts of the battle group was going through on different days and stuff. And I looked down and I seen this book on his bed, and it was an old one. It was, and I recognised it straight away, like a square, almost A4 book, and it was like instructions for the SAS type of thing. And it used to be, a bestseller years ago. And I looked at it and I was like, "What the fuck you got that for?" And he just looked at me and goes, "Because I can't remember everything all the fucking time." And I was like, fair enough, And again, him being quite humble and not taking the piss out of us, I think. But it made me giggle. But they took us through some of the drills, like, for hiding in the day, teaching us how to build Benghazi boilers and stuff like that. But it was the night navics that, do your pacing, look at the stars, stuff like that. And I was surprised that we were getting, we're doing the pacing, writing a bit of paper with a rose on it and going by the stars, that we were going from checkpoint to checkpoint within 10, 15 meters to get to that checkpoint across the desert. And it was just, I would never have had any training like that before, or since actually after that. And it was more of just an interest period that we had while we were out there. And, I'd take my hat off. They taught us really well, but they didn't talk down to us when they did it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I always think you remember where you came from, and also that it's not about you've not just suddenly become superior at doing something everybody else. You've just done the basics well and over again, and you've trained. And so if you're able to do that, anybody can, and so you're always aware of that when you go to a unit, that if you're training, you do the basics well over and over again, eventually you become proficient, you become expert at it. And so that's the same for anything. And I think that gives people heart, because they're like, this SAS guy he didn't have a built-in nav system that he knows where all the stars are, he knows where north is at any given time, he magged to grid any time. He's just trained, and he's done the basics over and over again until he's become proficient at it. And if I can, you can, and that's the way it works.
I forgot to ask, what year was it you joined? Or went through selection, sorry.
So I joined in '89. I think I did selection in '98.
I'm trying to think where I was in that year. We were in Ireland. So 9/11 happens. I remember it happening and thinking, shit, everything's going to change. And initially we thought it was fake. It's just a fucking movie on TV or something like that. I remember being at work, going back in the afternoon, and no one's working. Literally, everyone's down tools. There's no one on the vehicles or anything like that. I was down at Larkhill at the School of Artillery, and everyone was in the troop office listening to the radio or watching the TV that was in there, and they just said, like, what the fuck's going on? And we all knew that things were going to change. And I'm not saying that with hindsight. We did really think that then, just at a low level, for us. What was it like for you when that happened? Did everything just change overnight, or?
Yeah, pretty much. And although I probably didn't realize the magnitude of it, I was actually sat in the interest room at D Squadron when it all went off on the news, and we kind of knew then that things would things would kick off after that. But probably didn't realize the magnitude of it or how enduring it would be. But yeah, most people do remember exactly where they were when it happened.
So did the focus on training for you change or anything like that?
Yeah, and in various different ways. And so the how we trained, where we trained, the type of training we did all changed, and yeah, happened quite quick. And then yeah, that was us. And that set off a period. That period from sort of 2003 onwards was a real busy period. That sort of decade that followed was probably the busiest our SAS has been since the Second World War.
I mean, you're talking about 2003 and the invasion of Iraq, and again, kind of alluded to it earlier, whether that was right or wrong. Not for me to say. We went there. I was part of 3RH then, and we were there for the initial Optelic and went in, fired our guns and stuff like that. But I must admit, initially I thought they wanted us there. When we went through like Safwan and ended up going towards up to Basra, and we were coming across the locals, they were all happy as Larry to see us. And then it kind of fucking changed overnight. Well, we've won the war, and then it changed overnight. Whether that was mismanagement by the Americans or what, I can't say, because I'm not an expert in these things. But there was definitely a change, and it was not for the better.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not at the high level of echelons of decision making, but I think there was a few things there. I think there was obviously an issue with the intelligence, the satellite imagery, the WMDs, and I have some kind of first-hand knowledge of the truth of whether those WMDs were there or not. I think history's kind of shown us that they weren't. Um, then the kind of fallout from it, and making Iraq a better place quickly than how we found it, and I'm not sure we got that right. We probably made a mistake, and that's the royal we that the Americans were leading on.
Yeah.
We disbanded the blue light services, the military. We didn't have a plan for when everything was broken, how to put it together again, which was another big one. And it's no coincidence that the public appetite changed. So before the war, people were overwhelmingly in favor of invading Iraq. By the end of Iraq, people were overwhelmingly in favor of no war again. And that's a massive shift in public
Right.
appetite, which politicians have kind of molded. And so, yeah, I've got my own opinions on it, but you know, I was, I was on the ground for a lot of that, so I saw things firsthand. But yeah, it's one of those things you would have liked to have turned out better. There was no real winners in that. And even the Iraqis, you think the stuff that went on there, so you just kind of want to leave somewhere a better place than you found it.
Yeah. I mean, I've likened it to our version of Vietnam almost. Thought we'd gone in there to do good, and like you say, the public's opinion changed and stuff like that. And you're right, it was mismanaged. I mean, there's a documentary I watched by a guy called Mark Felton on YouTube, and he spoke about what happened at the end of the Second World War in Vietnam when the Brits were in charge, and they couldn't there wasn't enough people there to um, settle the country down because there was the communism then already had started, and so they used all the Japanese prisoners of war they had. They basically rearmed them and said, right, you're working for us now. And of course, they were like, yeah, they'll do as they're told. And it was working. They were doing all the low level jobs while the army was out there doing the jungle fighting and stuff like that. But it just goes to show that we should have, and I don't want to go over and over, or in Iraq, we should have kept the people who were in charge, but just managed them. And then I think it would have been a very different outcome.
Yeah, I think you're right. Hindsight's a great thing, but everybody believed they were going there for the right reasons and for what they're doing, and yeah, it didn't really work out that way. But as soldiers on the ground, we don't really. It's politicians in the higher echelons that have the controls and levers for that. You just try and do the job as best as you can, and we always did. We always tried to just believe in what we were doing and do it to the best, so that we go get home safe and look in the mirror and think, I did what I was supposed to do, the best of my ability. That's on someone else.
Now, I've always said that. Whether we're there right or wrongly, I went out there. We fought a war. I don't care what anyone else calls it. It was a war, and we fought the war and we won, and we did our best. And I'm immensely proud of what we did. Whether it was right or wrong or not, I don't care. But we won, and we did our best. That's all I'm bothered about.
Hmm.
So, I mean, Iraq for you had different connotations and stuff like that compared to the tours and stuff that progressed for us. I mean, it got quieter later on. But I believe something happened to you out there that did you be able to talk about that?
I can't go into too much detail, but most people are aware that I got captured out in the Middle East, and that sort of signaled the end of my career, because I could sort of see it coming. And the way we operated then, I was worried this sort of thing was going to happen. And bizarrely, even after I was captured, the year after I was captured, the exact same thing happened. So it was one of those things I could see coming and repeating itself. But when people don't listen to you, which is quite rare down at Hereford, people will normally listen to you, particularly if you're not just in the door. And once that happened, I had a difficult decision to make, and I thought that's it for me. If I feel like I'm not being listened to and these things happen, then I've got a tough decision to make, and that's when I left.
I mean, something like that's got to affect your mental health as well. I mean, you can't go through that unscathed.
Yeah, well, I always thought I had. I always thought it was okay. There was no like big debrief or anything after it. I think there would be now. I think nowadays there would be a debrief, there'd be decompression, there would be some kind of, psychological training. There wasn't any of that. I was just away the next day and doing something else. But I always thought I was okay, and then I had issues sleeping and stuff, and hypervigilance and bits and bobs that I thought had nothing to do with PTSD. And it was only until I went to Veterans First Point to ask if they could change my medication, because sometimes if I have a problem sleeping, I start getting a bit clumsy. I get a few days in a broken sleep, I start being quite forgetful or clumsy. So I asked for a change in the medication, and that's when they kind of discovered there probably was these layers of post-traumatic stress. And so, yeah, and you always think, no, it's not me, because I've got friends and they're exactly the same. They've got hypervigilance. They sit with the back to the door. They count exits. They study people. They've got difficulty sleeping. And he was like, yeah, that's because they've all got PTSD as well. So when you're surrounded by the same people, you think you're normal, don't you? And I used that in the loosest term, but I think I was guilty of that. I just thought I've got the same symptoms as all my mates, so I'm the same. We're all fine, and sometimes we're not all fine.
Yeah, plus you don't want to admit it, and again, we don't fucking talk to each other enough and stuff like that. So I mean, you decided to leave. What was the leaving process like for you? What did you do straight after as well? After that?
Yeah, it was unbelievable. I got this CV. We did our training, and CV was like a local plumber in Hereford, and they were like, yeah, just use those subjects and just fill it in. And when I first left, I didn't really experience the whole problem with Civvy Street, because I was doing the bodyguard and I was doing security for CNN and stuff. So I didn't really, and I was surrounded with the same guys, and so I didn't really have any dramas. I thought that I'm fine. But I got really bored. I didn't like doing the bodyguard, and it was really boring. It was more money than I'd ever seen in my life. But money can only get you so far. Money's just money, it comes and it goes. But if you're bored, or you're not like enjoying the stuff you're doing, there's no amount of money that can thing with it. So once I thought I'd saved up enough money to put myself through university, that's when I started applying for jobs. And not a lot of people know this, but I applied for in excess of 1,000 jobs over the course of a year without a single interview. And that's when I thought, right, I'm not gonna find my way in this world. And I kind of stumbled into things, various jobs, which has kind of been synonymous. Everything I've done, whether it's public speaking, motion capture for video games, whatever, I've kind of stumbled into being quite fortunate.
I spoke to a guy a few months back who was in the Paras, and when he left the Paras, he was doing CP work. And we talked about the transition at Civvy Street. And he says, well, it happened very much later for me, because he stayed on, or he said the same thing that you said, Dan. He left, he was doing CP work, and he was still doing the same job. He still had the same people around him. And it wasn't until he finished doing that I wouldn't say his world come crashing down, but it's where it became real. It started to become difficult, because he didn't have that all around. He wasn't, my resettlement was down to all the shot, do a course, out, okay, job. And I was quite lucky. I got a job almost straight away. But a lot of people go into the CP work and don't leave go of the military until that's over.
And I think I saw both, and then I fell into work doing sort of project worker. It was a volunteer role. I wasn't paid, but that's kind of what led to work. And then I kind of fell into different roles. So everything that I do now, I've just kind of stumbled into, but with the right attitude, with it, I'll give it a go. So, for example, public speaking, motivational speaking, that takes up quite a bit of my time. That's probably half of everything that I do, whether it's motivational talks or whether it's workshops. And I was up in Aberdeen doing the oil and gas thing, and they were supposed to have this skydiver who was going to come in and do a talk on risk, and he cancelled like the day before or 2 days before or something. And they were all in a mad flap. They needed a speaker, and I said, "Look, I'll give it a go if you want somebody to speak, but it'll be from a kind of military perspective." And they said, "Yeah," but and they were desperate, so they got me up, and I did this talk right on risk, and I got this like standing ovation, and there was a woman in the crowd who came up and she said, "Oh, it was brilliant. How long you been speaking for?" I said, "About 40 minutes." And she said, "Well, you should do it for a living." I said, "Nah, it's not a proper job. Speaking, like, motivate, what a load of nonsense." And she went, "Well, I'm looking for a guy next week, and it's 2 grand." I said, "I'm your man." so, uh, so there's, and one thing the military teach you is never volunteer, never volunteer for nothing. But actually, everything I've done, whether it's motion capture for video games, I was the first mocap guy for Rockstar Games back nearly 20 years ago now, when they were first starting this thing called motion capture. And I've been doing it ever since, and I love it, and it's developed as well. Back in the day, there might not have been so much money in it. Now it's massive, video game industry, and I was there right at the start when they started motion capture, and it's one of those things that just started with a can-do attitude, and I'll give it a go.
The video game industry, it's massive, and it's worth billions and billions. And people don't appreciate what goes into making a game, like say Call of Duty or stuff like that. I interviewed a couple of guys recently who have a software studio in America called Old Glory Studios, and they're making a game at the moment. One was an ex-infantry guy, and one was ex-American Marines. And you don't. One of them started off. He got into once he left the Marines, and he got into the video game industry. He was doing all the write-ups or writing the scripts and the stories for like Rainbow Six, Tom Clancy, and stuff like that. And I was like, sat there thinking, I never knew none of this happened. It's a vast area, and there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of people. It's an industry. It's like, you forget that people like yourself do the motion capture and stuff like that. That's how it looks surreal. And I imagine you give advice for the games and other projects that you've been on as well.
Yeah, and like you say, you forget how much goes in and how long it takes. These games can take 5 years before they hit the shelves. They've maybe spent hundreds of millions making the game. So there's a pressure on there for it to be of a quality and to have a return on it. You think Grand Theft Auto 5 was like the highest selling entertainment product of all time. That's toys, movies, games, everything. I can't remember. I made something like 250 million in its first week or something. So these are, it's a big industry now, and I have a little bit of pride that the kind of Rockstar Games, Rockstar North, was formed in Scotland, and has grown to what it is. It's one of the kind of wee success stories when some of the other industries have fallen by the side, whether manufacturing or whatever. So no, it's great to have been involved since the start, see it developed, and like I say, I've been doing that nearly 20 years now. The mocap, I'm one of the OGs now. They'll soon be rolling me out of there and going, "No thanks, you're too old now."
You're not moving quick enough, hurry up.
Yeah.
So how did you get into TV work, and what was your foray into that? Like you touching into that the first time?
Well, when I first started, I got my sort of stunt ticket, and I thought I'd be either a military film advisor, and I would advise. I got as annoyed as everybody else when you had the never-ending magazines and guys had their berries on back to front and stuff, and everything that annoys everybody in the military. So I thought I'll change it. I'll be this military advisor.
Yeah, but I'm sure people do the bury thing on purpose to annoy us lot.
Yeah, totally. And so I went and did my stuntman stuff, and I thought that's me. And there wasn't a lot of work at that time. There is now in that stuff, but back then there was. And so I was on this website for that, and someone called me up and said, "Oh, there's going to be a TV show, and it's about the SAS and blah blah blah." And I was a bit hesitant, but when I went down to the initial meeting, Foxy was there, a couple others, and I met them, and they're great guys. Foxy and that get on well with Foxy, and I thought I'll give it a go, and I'm glad I did it when I did. I quite liked the first couple of series. They seemed quite real, raw. There was no backstories or angles they were trying to put away. So no, I enjoyed it, and it created a profile for me. I've got to be thankful for that. It gave me the profile to have the social media profiles, do other things, do the talks, write books, and stuff like that. So it's I'm thankful for it.
I mean, I've interviewed one of the lasses who was on recently called Claire Eves, sorry. And she touched on a lot about the amount of stuff that happens that doesn't get shown or in the the cut from the production and stuff like that. I also interviewed a guy last year, excuse me, ex-Foreign Legion, and he did the one with Bear Grylls years ago. He was the sergeant in that, which amazed me, and he said the same thing. The amount of work that goes into all these things, and you only actually in the production or what comes actually out on the TV. You don't see most of it, and it must be frustrating when you've done something and you think that's a good bit of TV that it doesn't make the final cut type of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's the same for any TV. So a series or a movie, so much of it ends up on the cutting floor because they've got to be quite concise and surgical about what there's got to have those punch points, accentuated through it, particularly when it's a series. You might only have 30, 40 minutes. What makes that 30, 40 minutes? Because you've only got them we only have the candidates for about 8 days. And you then have to put that into a 40-minute, episode or something, and so not everything makes it, rightly or wrongly. And I think you've got to remember that you're not there with a TV eye on it. And so one example is the candidates. We don't get involved in the recruiting of the candidates because we would be looking for a certain type of individual. So some of the key things, integrity, resilience, fitness, they're looking at it from a very different eye. They're looking for television and they want a spectrum. Male, female, gender, sexuality, background, backstory, everything. So religion, everything that can create a spectrum. And I get that. And so they have to look at it with a TV eye. We just have to do our bit in it.
It still must be frustrating, though. You're right. One thing, though, the first couple of series were better than what's coming out now. It really is.
Yeah, I think so. Although I don't really watch the recent ones, but I'm kind of proud of how the first couple were. They were quite real, quite raw and gritty. There was no nonsense about them, and I quite like that. And I think if you're an ordinary person at home, you can identify with an ordinary person on the TV set who's joined in within 8 days. And I always thought, hand on heart, that everybody that joined 8 days later when they finished were hopefully stronger in certain areas than what they were when they started. And anything that does that can only be a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, let's go back a little bit about your journey through PTSD, if you don't mind talking about that. You said you went and asked for new medication, and then they said like you probably got PTSD. What was that journey like for you?
I think there was a little bit of really because I don't feel I have, and then there's a bit of coming to terms with the link between symptoms and what that means. Because you speak to a lot of veterans, they'll be like, nah, I do that as well. It's just a veteran thing. We sit with our back to the wall, we cover the exits, we study people, where there's elements of stress there. It might not be high level stress, but there's like, why do you sit with your back to the wall? Why do you study people when they come in? Why do you think of contingency plans? What can I use as a weapon? How can I dismember this person with a paper clip next to me? There's a reason you go through that in your mind, and so there will be an element of stress going on there for that very reason. The same reasons that give you broken sleep at night or make you do certain things, drive different ways back at home at night. Those things, there's a reason behind them. And quite often that's a level of stress, which will be high or low at any time, like your physical health. And it's just making sure that you're rounded and that you don't make the worst decisions when your mental health is at the lowest point, and having a good network around you. And which is one of the reasons how we set up Who Dares Cares, and why we do that, not just with veterans, but blue light services, for that very reason.
Yes, I mean, you just said something there about being very defensive all the time when you see people. I still do it. I went through therapy last year for very different things, but there was part of the military side of it as well. But I still find myself now walking down the street and you see somebody else walking up the street, and the first thing I think of is, how can I take them out if I need to? And I can't stop thinking like that. And whether that's right or wrong or not, but I do. I literally think, right, if he'd come for me, how would I deal with it? And again, that's not normal. You shouldn't be thinking like that, really. But it is what it is, like you're saying. You just get used to it. Sitting with your back, sort of looking at the door, stuff like that. We all do it, I think, without even realizing. But again, it doesn't mean that we've all got PTSD.
Yeah,
It's just something we do, And
yeah,
again, we shouldn't even be saying that. It's just something we do because it's not right.
yeah. And I think as long as it doesn't interfere with your life in ways that you don't want it to, we might not want to give those things up. Like I think if we gave those things up, that hypervigilance, that contingency planning, thinking, we probably wouldn't feel like we were protecting ourselves. We'd feel a sense of vulnerability. So I think there's an element in there of, I don't want to give that up. Whether you call it PTSD or stress or whatever, whether it's abnormal, I don't want to give that up
Mm.
because I'd rather have it, just in case for that one time when I might need it. And it's one of the things I've just refused. Other things I've managed better, I've coped better. But I think as long as it's not impacting yours and the people around yours lives, how bad is it, to and there'll be different things. But I
Yeah.
think now if it just consumes my mind a little bit when we're out and it's distracting a little bit, that's not the worst thing in the world, because if I need that on that one day where I do need it, well, at least I've got it. And so I don't want to give that up. So, yeah.
So, can you just talk about the organisation that you set up then, please?
Yeah, so Who Dares Cares? It was Cammy and myself. Cammy was ex KOSB, Kings on Scottish Borders. I was Royal Scots. He's a big Rangers fan. I'm a big Celtic fan. So it crosses that divide in Scotland, and
Which is a
and
big
so
divide.
yeah, and so yeah, we set it up, and we were seeing lots of our friends and hearing from other ones that were just slipping through our fingers. We just couldn't deal with it, so we knew we had to create something, and so we created this organisation. It started. Cammy will tell you on the back of a fag packet, but it started just as something with the little meetings, walk, talk, and brews and stuff, getting people together, like-minded people, and then it sort of grew on from there, where we do different events. We do the Kilt Walk, the West Highland Way, outdoor events, camps, fundraisers and stuff like that. And we've been fortunate; we've been able to help other charities as well as help individuals. So yeah, we're coming on for 10 years now. Being
Wow.
formed, and yeah, it's grown, and we've grown slowly and gradually, rather than some of these big hitters that have grown probably too big too quick. And that's helped us, I think, a little bit.
There's lots of great organisations out there. I mean, obviously I alluded to that I was getting the therapy last year, and that was through the Eastern Veterans Trust over in Seaham, not far from where I'm at. And there's individuals out there that do fantastic work for people. There really is. But one of the things you've got to get people to do is go to them, is to talk to them, is to, and I'm not being like, I'm not saying this is the best podcast in the world or anything like that, but I have had people approach me because of the podcast and say, I like what you do. It's made me think this, that, and the other. And I always signpost them to Eastern Veterans Trust all the time because I know they'll get their help. And this is, they'll take somebody on who hasn't gone through Up Courage, and, you can ring them directly and stuff like that. And the way I got involved with therapy and stuff was through Up Courage. And at the time last year, I didn't really know about Up Courage. You know, I've heard the name, but I didn't know what it entailed. And it was my doctor, my GP, that went, "You're a veteran, aren't you?" And that's a word I don't like using on myself anyway, but for other reasons, because I think veterans are, the Second World War. That's what I look at you a veteran type thing is, not us. And she said, "Right, you're a veteran, Up Courage." And I was like, "Right, okay, no, you get fast tracked." And it did. I got, I was in therapy within nearly 4 weeks, getting my first session, which I thought was brilliant, because you hear stories of people that go for years with nothing, and sometimes it's too late.
Yeah, and I think when this goes out, there will be veterans listening that have had various experiences, and I think they'll be on both ends of those spectrum, where they've had help quite quickly because of the fact they've highlighted a veteran, or they've had the opposite. They've thought they would get quite quick treatment, and they haven't. And I know firsthand people on both sides of that. I think it's something they should have. I think when you go places like the States, you realise that that world can exist. You know, there is a thank you for your service, and we have a responsibility to make sure you're okay. And we don't really have that yet here. It's getting better. And we do have things like Up Courage. We have, different things, the Armed Forces Covenant, bits and bobs, that works to a degree. And we're getting better at that. But one of the single-handedly the biggest issue we find is getting the person to go for help themselves. We've got plenty of people that say, "Oh, I've got a mate, he's struggling, blah blah blah." We have no right to go and chap someone's door or thing and go, "Right, we're here to help because your mate said." We need that person to be the person that puts themselves forward and say, "I'm struggling a bit here in this area here," and that's without doubt our single biggest issue we have, because for all the best intentions in the world, we can't impose ourselves on people. We need that person to take the first step, and we'll walk all the rest of the steps with them. They just have to take the first step, but arguably it's the hardest.
Yeah, no, it really is. And sometimes I found that when I knew something was wrong, I had to seek help. You're right. It is hard. It really is hard. And all of a sudden, you even put walls up yourself. You know what I mean? You ask for help, but then step back. And there's also, there's walls in front of you. When I first asked for help, I asked a nurse. I says, "What do I do about asking about speaking to someone for mental health?" And she just looked at me. She wasn't ready for that question. That's the thing. And she just went, "Oh, you fill a form online," and walked away. And I was just like, "What? You don't know how hard it was for me to just ask that question." And I went off and filled this form in online and fucking let rip on it, basically. And within 2 days, I was in front of the doctor. I thought I was in trouble. But sometimes, asking for help is the hardest thing. But you've got to be prepared that there's going to be barriers in front of you, and you have to get over them.
Yeah, and the other thing is that you've highlighted a good point, that is, if you're a veteran of blue light services or whatever, and you make that hard step of putting yourself out there and going, "I need a bit of support here," and you don't get the response you're looking for, how likely are you to make that step again? You've just built that up and opened the door, and if you don't get the support you're looking for, the answer you were looking for, or the direction or whatever, you're quite likely to close those doors and not open them again. And that's why there's so many military charities out there, as controversial as that sounds. But they all do slightly different things. Some of them do the same thing, some of them do slightly different. If you don't quite get what you need at that time, and everybody needs very different things, you can quite easily put those shutters up, and that's you. And so we need to be able to get it right first time, and be able to at least signpost, or I don't have the answers, but I know who will, and I will get you in touch with the person that's going to give you the best help you need right now. That's it. Those shutters haven't been shut. They've maybe been lowered a little bit, but they're not shut. and there's a chance of getting in there, but that bit's critical.
I mean, I found that also, whether you agree with this or not, I don't know. But don't be afraid to say to your mate, look, you're not fucking right. There's something wrong with you. You know, I can see it. You can't see it. I can see it. Go and give these a ring. And I suppose, like you said earlier, you can't impose yourself on them because that just doesn't work. You can't do that as someone. You can't rock up all of a sudden in their life and go, I'm going to fix you, because it fucking doesn't work like that. But if you've got a friend who you know is hurt, who's suffering or who's in pain or whatever, fucking encouraging them to talk. Encourage them to talk to me, or talk. You get your friend to talk to you, or whatever. But talking is the best thing for people who are suffering in this way.
Yeah, and what you sometimes find is if you are that individual, you might incrementally be deteriorating in a certain way, which you won't recognize on a daily basis. But you don't see your friend for a week or a month, they'll see it
Yeah.
because they'll be like, I saw him last month and he was fine, and now he's just withdrawn or angry or not the same as he or she normally is. So they are the best people to identify it because you don't see. It's like, when people have kids and I've seen them a couple of months ago and they come back and they're a foot taller and I'm like, man, you've grown. And they probably don't realize they've grown. They're like, I don't really remember shooting up a foot, but incrementally over that time you've deteriorated or you're changed in some way. And so sometimes it's that network around us. And like any part of that journey, your network around you is so important, and I can't see things that are happening, to me. I'm busy doing other things or concentrating on other things, but people on the outside have a far better view of that change, particularly over the sort of weeks and months.
I mean, the other thing is as well, when I say talking is important, it's not weirdly talking to a stranger is a lot easier than talking to your mates.
Totally.
You don't expect any reprisal what they think of you. I mean, we shouldn't. Everyone, no one should think, "Oh, what do they think of me? What do they think of me?" That shouldn't come through people's minds. It doesn't matter what they think of you. Your close family and your close friends, all right, what they think about you matters because you love them or they're close friends. But individuals who have got nothing to do, old friends and whatever, you shouldn't pay attention to what I'm trying to rephrase this. You shouldn't pay attention to what people think about you because it doesn't make an iota of difference to you, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, totally. And I think one of the things when I wrote the book, and you kind of highlight a good point that when I wrote the book, the first people that I made sure that saw the manuscript was family and close friends, because I was probably more concerned with what they thought, the things that they took out of it that I might not appreciate at the time. Because you write a book, particularly an autobiography, and you kind of open the door to your life. And so there were certain people that I wanted to make sure that they'd seen the manuscript and could highlight things that perhaps I couldn't see or I hadn't thought about. And I cared more about what they thought. Had somebody in my family, and this happened, people that were very close to me said things that made me change things in the book. And because that mattered to me, that cared to me.
Yeah.
I didn't want that on them. But for individuals, for strangers, I don't want to say I don't care, but I don't mind what they think about me or about a certain thing or something I've written. It's my life, it's my autobiography, it's true, and so I don't I don't mind what they think. I don't mind
Mm.
what they take from it, and everybody will take different things from it. But that the family and close friends, that part did. I minded what they thought.
And that leads me on about your book. What made you decide to write it?
Yeah, I wrote it right after I left. I was bored doing the bodyguard, and I thought I'll write down my autobiography while it's fresh in my mind. And then I never bothered with it, put it away, didn't do anything for a few years. And then after the Channel 4 show, I thought there might be an appetite for it. So It was a long battle. I wrote it down. The MOD said yes, then said no, and then fell out with the publisher. And then some things were okay, and then a couple of years later they weren't. And then, things changed right up to the last minute. And then eventually, you know, this thing called The Pilgrim was eventually came out, which yeah, it's been a long time coming, and I'm just glad it's out there now.
When was it released?
It just literally last week, and you'll find it on the shelves now, or the publisher's Pen and Sword. You can get it from there, probably on Amazon as well.
And have you had much feedback already for it?
I literally got an email today. So I've had lots of individual reviews and like yourself, feedback just going, it was a bit of an emotional roller coaster. There's different things I didn't expect, even from the very first page, things that I didn't appreciate. And when you get different emotions going in the one book, that can always be a good thing. Whether it makes you laugh, whether it makes you cry, if it makes you do all of those, then great, it ticks that box. So yeah, that was great feedback. And then I just had an email hot off the press today saying that the book's done so well that the publishers had to reprint it. So that's always, for anybody that's an author, that's kind of music to their ears if something needs reprinted. So really happy.
Are you planning any other follow-ups to it then?
Yeah, so over COVID, when it got quiet, I wrote a couple of other books. One on resilience. I did a bit of study, bit of research, different anecdotes, different areas in life, whether it's business, social, mental health, whatever, and wrote that down. So for the most part, that's written. So that will probably be the follow up to this. And I've got a couple of other little things that I've wrote down as well, which hopefully will come out.
So we're going to be doing any action novels then?
Possibly. I mean, that's 3 or 4 books down the line, but yeah, well, maybe dip our toe in the water and see how we get on with that.
Yeah. So what is your plans for the immediate future then?
So I enjoy doing the talks, the workshops. Obviously, the book's out, and hopefully there'll be some follow up. I like TV. It can be quite a fickle industry, but I never say never for TV projects, presenting, whatever. And I have Stoic events where we take teams on team building. So just STOIC, Stoic events, and we take teams up in Scotland, take them on, make them spies for the weekend, let them shoot things, blow things up, get on the speedboats and stuff, and on the helicopters, and they love all that. So that keeps me busy. And then any spare time, I do my charity stuff, my children's panels. I did a children's panel yesterday, so that keeps me out of trouble.
I mean, I've had you on here now for an hour and 45 minutes, and I did say at the beginning of this, I'll try not to keep you too long, because I know you're a busy guy.
Yeah,
So
jump
I'd like
off.
to say thank you for your coming on. I really appreciate it, and I've loved talking to you. One thing, you see, I tend to end these quite quickly, and I've been told off by a mate of mine. So I'll say, right, oh, okay, we're off now. See ya. Click on. And he says, no, you go too quick. So I'm going to start asking people a question at the end, and then my mood's make it a bit longer. So if you could give your advice to anyone who's saying going to join the military or go for selection or something like that, what would you give them?
I would always say something that's always been true for me since the start, whether it was the consequences, the outcome I wanted, give it a go. Because the knowing of how it turned out is better than the not knowing. And we've all been there where we've thought, maybe if I'd have just done that or tried it or give it a go. Like I've got lots of mates now that went, I should have given it a go. And the knowing is better than the not knowing, even if it's not the outcome you're looking for.
I get that, yeah, I really do. One of the reasons I do this, because I thought, well, I've got to give it a go. How hard can it be? Yeah. it's not so easy. Right, anyway, I'll end the episode there. Again, thank you for coming on,
Thank
and
you.
I really appreciate it. When I put this out, I'll put the links out for your book and everything like that, and for the Stoic stuff and for the charity as well. Again, thanks for coming on. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, appreciate it. Take care.
Right, I'll just end the recording now. I hope you enjoyed that podcast. I enjoyed recording it. If you could just hit the like button, and also if you could subscribe and hit the notification bell, that'd be great, because it'll help the channel grow. The more people will see it, the bigger it'll get, and the more guests I can get on, and the more people I can talk to. Well, I hope you enjoyed it, like I said. Look forward to the next one. Hopefully, we'll be out next week as normal. Bye-bye now.